Welcome back to Time with Steel Garage. I'm Jimmy, and this is the 2J Merc. Now, I did something a little different last video, and I asked what you guys wanted to see, and overwhelmingly, it was the 2J. And I know a lot of you guys are like, man, Jimmy, what's taking so long on this build? Well, life, day job, concurrent cars, working on other people's cars that I don't record for the channel. And honestly, the Camaro is kind of taking center stage, if you will, just based off sponsors, and I'm super grateful for that opportunity, so I got to take advantage of it. Now, the 2J is my baby, and a lot of people ask me what my favorite car on the property is, and people expect me to say the DeLorean. Well, I think this is actually my favorite. And if you guys watch Freiberger and the Roadkill crew and all them, you'll hear him say, don't get it right, just get it running. Man, I'm just incapable of doing that on this build. I've started out as a budget build, and it's snowballed significantly. And I'm building this car with the mindset of being a reliable daily driver. And I just can't bring myself, it's just such a nice car. I love it. And everything I do, I try to do to the best of my ability. In the past, I showed you guys how to wire this thing from a budget perspective. Get a couple of wrecked harnesses, get some used harnesses off eBay, pin them out, rewire it. For a couple $100, you have your own 2J conversion harness. This is one of those areas where, you know, I didn't really need to buy a harness. The one I made worked just fine, but I decided to splurge and get a really nice, brand new, built for me harness, which I usually always wire stuff myself. And I went ahead and got a wiring specialties harness, and man, it took a while. It took like 3 months to get it. Those guys are backed up. They always, you know, a lot of orders, and I was just the next, till my pecking order came up, you know what I mean? But I can honestly say the quality of this harness is just as good, if not better, than I would have done myself, probably better. And I'm pretty stoked. So what I really want to get to on this 2J is all the parts I've bought for it that have been stacking up, get them installed. So the priority here, get this thing wired up, get the ECU mounted, get the power distribution block in. I'll show you guys the drive shaft, which if you've seen my short, you know it's already installed on the car, but I'll go into a little bit more detail. And I'd like to finish the exhaust and just kind of see what parts we have left to install, where we're at, so we can order the rest of the parts to install. Now, I got a radiator, I've got an intercooler, I've got a lot of stuff laying around for this thing. It just needs to be installed. And you know I like to do the old fridge method. There's a lot of stuff to do. So fuel system, oil system, cool system, finish exhaust, electric fan, wire the harness, install the shifter and adjust it, wire the trans shifter, electrical side of things, gauges, put the interior back together. Drive shaft is already mounted. Wow, I could actually cross one off the list. Look at that. Boom. There's no fluids in the car. Differential leaks, probably okay with that. Trans rear seal leaks. I don't care about this or this right now. Until this thing moves under its own power and I see that that transmission works, we're just gonna leave it. Intercooler is mocked up, but needs to be hard mounted, and I don't have any piping or couplers, so I have to kind of sit down and design that. Headlights are in. I bought all new hardware, so they're gonna come back out so I can reinstall them the right way. Once all of this stuff is done and the car actually moves, I need to make a trans tunnel since I cut the floor out. There's no throttle cable, center console reassembly, blah, blah, blah. So this is that part of the build. I like to call it the nickel and dime part of the build. Everybody thinks the hard part's bolting the motor in. It really isn't that hard. So getting the hard parts in, the big parts in, there's a lot of reward and visuals, but it's all this other little stuff that takes forever on a project. The EcoBoost DeLorean, man, I think that was a 2.5-year build. And the last 6 months was all nickel and dime stuff, just getting all the systems online. So let me show you this harness. Let's get to installing it. All right, so here's the harness, and man, I'm pretty impressed with it. It's super tight. It comes with wire leads for the, if you want to wire up your own power distribution block. Every single one of the leads is labeled. Air conditioning relay, speed signal sensor. They got factory style disconnects, relays, weather packs. It's phenomenal. And all the harness side connections are all labeled cam sensor, number 5 injector, starter power, blah, blah, blah. Factory brand new OEM Toyota sensor or connectors. They even send you a firewall boot. And I just went on their website. When you buy a harness, I think they email you the link, but I printed off all the instructions. And other than that, what we're looking at here, I got an MER Connect power distribution block. I love these things. It's an Eaton block. And if you saw how I wired the DeLorean, it's the same way. I like to wire things standalone so that the old, 30, 40-year-old car wiring isn't what's running my motor. So this is what's going to power this engine. I'm going to have to wire that in, obviously. We're running a Toyota Supra style MAF sensor, and I'm running the batch fire igniter that came with the motor. And then here we have a Toyota Aristo 2JZ GTE overseas ECU. Now, this is the big question mark. There's a little dent in it. I was told by the guy I bought it from that it was tested and works great, but eBay, full of crap. So these things have a tendency to overheat capacitors or leak over time. So I want to see if the motor fires with this thing first, once we get to that point, and then I'm going to send the ECU off to a specialist to have them go through the circuit board and make sure all the capacitors are good. It costs about $400 if you pay a professional. If you buy all the capacitors and the stuff yourself, it probably costs you a couple $100. I don't computer, man. I just make it work, plug it in. So part of the reason I'm doing this on this build is, the EcoBoost DeLorean has a $4,000 standalone ECU in it. It's got a custom tune. I don't want to deal with any of that in this car. I want factory sensors, factory computer. That's the way we're going. So I want to build a breakdown somewhere, go to a junkyard and steal sensors. You know what I mean? So anyhow, I asked them to extend this harness, and I don't think that they did. You guys will have to, you guys that know more, tell me in the comments. I'm pretty sure the American spec Supra's ECU is in the passenger floorboard, and if that's the case, this harness is probably factory length. Let me know. I don't know, I've never owned a Supra. So next step here is I already drilled out the firewall. On this 88 Mercedes, they built this thing to work on. The hood goes vertical, everything you need is up here in the engine compartment. Battery sits right here. Your ABS module, you got your Mercedes RPM relay, fuel pump control. I don't even know what this is. I gotta get some wiring diagrams, but I'm not using most of this stuff, and I'm probably gonna delete, the ABS doesn't work anyway. I think that computer's fried. But I went ahead and moved this stuff out of the way and drilled a hole in the firewall here. That's where I'm gonna route the glove box is right behind it, and that's where I'm gonna store the ECU. And that little boot that the harness came with fits perfect. I haven't decided yet. I might relocate the battery to the trunk, but if I get all this stuff out of the way in here, there's plenty of room to mount that power distribution block there. And I kind of like everything's under the hood. So I'm leaning towards keeping the battery up here and just getting rid of all this electronic stuff that I don't need. And this ABS monster block right here that is heavy and doesn't work, it would clean this up significantly. But car needs to run and drive before I worry about that stuff. So I'm gonna lay the harness down and let's just see how it's gonna fit. So I just kind of gently laid the harness across the motor here. I just wanna see lengthwise what we're working with. Obviously I had already kind of pre-measured this, but I gotta go through the firewall right here and then through that hole. The instructions want you to feed the harness out of the firewall. So I might actually listen to the instructions for once. They talk about putting the harness in a plastic bag and lubing it up. I have enough room here that I don't think that's necessary. So I'm gonna start the journey of feeding this octopus through that hole. We're gonna go behind the motor here where I can kind of support the harness up out of the way so it doesn't get cooked or damaged by a rocking motor. And then these injectors and everything kind of runs underneath the intake. This is gonna take me like 30 minutes probably just to get this back routed. So I'm gonna route this through and we'll come back once it's under the intake and start connecting things. Check it out, this link's gonna work out perfectly. So these are my flying leads that are gonna go to my power distribution block. I ran those through an existing hole in the firewall. I'm obviously gonna have to put a grommet in there and protect these wires. I've got a grommet here that came with the harness. It's important to note, I had them build me this harness for an A340 automatic, but with no wiring going to that transmission. I'm gonna handle the transmission side myself. So this harness I got from them is just for the motor. But it is wired accordingly for an automatic, and it'll run the throttle body and all that kind of stuff. But again, this is gonna be a manually shifted transmission. So routed this through the firewall very carefully, and you can see the length is probably gonna be perfect. I got everything out here now. This is the cool part. You guys remember how I had it wired before, and it's gonna work out essentially the exact same way. You can see the ECU is plugged in, and I'm gonna make a little shelf for this to sit in. And this is a disconnectable flying lead harness. Not using that. Batch fire ignition, East chip igniter is still plugged in. And then these are the two relays the harness comes with. I think one is ECU power and the other one is fuel pump. I'll have to double check on that. Those are gonna be mounted in here with the ECU. This is gonna be mounted in here with the ECU. I'm gonna make a removable tray that makes it tidy, goes in, and I'm probably gonna riv nut to those 3 holes you see there that are existing in the dash. So when you open the glove box, this will all be tidy inside here. Sliding all this through a firewall and hooking this up is about 3 days faster than building your own harness. I've been working a couple hours, taking my time. This harness is too expensive to rush through, but pretty impressed with it. I mean, you know, it's basically like it's a factory harness. It's cut perfectly, and got my batch fire coils run here. This is gonna run across the engine. Basically the way they have you start out is the front ground, #1 knock sensor, and then you move to the injectors, bring this harness over the front of the motors, alternator crank position sensor, MAF, oxygen sensor. This is a coolant, single wire coolant temperature sensor for the stock Supra cluster gauge. I don't know if I'm gonna use this or not. This is the ECM 2-pin coolant sensor that the ECU uses to see the temperature of the engine. On a GTE, the sensor's over here by the water pump. On an IS300 block, which is what this is, the sensor's hidden up under here, under the #1 intake runner. You can't see it, but my finger's on it. The difference is the IS300 connector versus the Supra connector. I'm gonna show you the difference here. So on the left, you can see a GTE 2-wire coolant sensor, and on the right, you can see an IS300 coolant sensor. It's the same sensor. It's a different plug, essentially. So the sensor operates the same. So I'm gonna have to swap out the green with the black, and then that'll plug right in. That's to be expected. This isn't a GTE. It's a conversion GTE. So everything else though has been good. The only thing is I've taped off all the wires I don't use. So this thing's wired for VSV PCM, which is, if you're using the stock twin turbo setup, they keep these wired in, so it gives you the option to run the stock twin turbos. I'm not going to use it. We're not using the evap valve sensors and evap canister emission sensors right here. We do have the map sensor plugged in so the engine can see boost. We've got the ETCS power, TPS, and the ETCSI motor plugged in. Got the MAF sensor plugged in here, and then this is going to go to a single factory oxygen sensor that I've already welded a bung for right there. I just got to wire up the other side of the oxygen sensor to the plug. So the only real thing I have left to do is wire a plug to my oxygen sensor that plugs into this plug, swap out this plug for the coolant temperature sensor, and then the rest of this will take care of itself as I start hiding everything. I just got to hide the harnesses that I'm not using, and then we'll come over here and we'll start wiring power. Oh, I forgot to mention, There's two wires that go to the starter. There's an actual pin that plugs into the starter, and then there's power to the starter that supplies the ECU through the harness. And one other thing is the factory ECU and wiring specialties do require a factory Toyota noise suppressor, and that's this little guy right here. Already plugged in. They say swaps can't look sexy. I disagree. I couldn't handle looking at those coil packs, so I reached out to FMS and he hooked me up with one of his custom coil pack covers. And there's even room for expansion if I ever want to go single coil per cylinder. I think it looks badass. I had a little jewelry and kind of tied in the AMG theme. And the harness is basically ran. I got to hook up a few grounds, tidy up some wiring a little bit, hide some stuff that's not being used. I got this power block here. Man, it's probably the sexiest engine I think I've ever built. I don't know how you can't like a 2J, to be honest with you. And I think it's lunchtime. Well, hello there. I took a break from doing electrical to start finishing the exhaust because that's how I am. I just kind of bounce around. I get bored with one thing, I got to start working on another thing. Brain was nuked. I just wanted to do something that I didn't really have to think about. You know what I mean? So I got another 6 feet section of exhaust. 6 foot section of exhaust made here, and I think it's time to start working on that. See where the day takes us. All right, welcome back to Under the Merc. So I thought I'd go over the drive shaft because this has also been completed. I just want to go over this for anybody out there with a Mercedes that's thinking about doing what I'm doing. So A340e, this is a Japanese Aristo transmission. It is the electronic version. It does not use a cable. But Guivo disc is what the Super uses. Now there's two different bolt patterns. This is the wider pattern on this car, and then I converted down to a Spicer yoke conversion to the standard 1310 U-joint. I had a drive shaft made by FullTorqueDriveShafts.com. The stock Mercedes drive shaft is like 1 3/4 inches. It's a weird millimeter size. I beefed up to 3 inches to handle the torque of this motor, and I went with an off-road style slip yoke on the front. So this moves in and out. Factory drive shaft safety loop for the Merc, actually, it's perfect. This used to be a 2-piece drive shaft. There was a hanger bearing here. I had to cut this flush on the tunnel to make room for the 1-piece, and the 1-piece fits perfect, and the pinion angle will get better as it sits on the ground. If you guys want to do this, I got this adapter here from Drift Motion, and the Spicer 1310 adapter, they're available from everywhere. I think I got that from Summit Racing. Now, in the back of the Mercedes used a smaller U-joint, obviously, than the Toyota used. It was way beefier, so I needed a different conversion piece, again from Spicer 1310. There's two types of 1310 U-joints. There's large and small. These are small. Pretty much every car out there uses them that's still running U-joints. And then this piece right here, MB-T90-100, that converted from the rubber Guivo disc as well. Still running the standard W124 Mercedes rear diff. I do 100% expect to grenade this rear end. And then once we grenade this rear end, I'll find something beefy from either another Mercedes or a S14 or something out there that can handle the power of this motor, and we'll beef this section up. But for now, I'm keeping that stock diff. There was some Mercedes options made that were limited slip, and stronger. But I'd like to get into a differential that's more modern and easily serviceable, and it has more aftermarket support than the Mercedes stuff. So we'll get into that eventually when I blow the rear end up, which is inevitable. So that is the drivetrain. We actually have a complete drivetrain now. Toyota 2JZ motor, Toyota A340e, full custom drive shaft set up by me using various companies, stock Mercedes rear diff and axles. Drivetrain is complete. Now, I got the exhaust, so if you guys catch you back up on the exhaust, we've got a straight dump pipe for the wastegate. I made everything myself. We've got a 3-inch stainless downpipe. I used the muffler that I was originally going to use on the EcoBoost DeLorean. It's a race muffler, straight through. Nothing in there, a little packing on the outside. I figured it'd be cool to use as a resonator. Plus, this will give me the ability to drop the exhaust next to the transmission if I have to make shift linkage adjustments or pull the drive shaft, change the U-joint. This is exactly how the Mercedes was. It had a drop point right here, and then it had a hanger that came off the transmission cross member. This cross member I made myself, 1/4-inch steel. I just drew it up in QCAD, had it cut by Sign Cut Send, saved me a lot of time. So now I've brought the exhaust on the factory routing. Now that we have the drive shaft in, I can finish the exhaust, and I've got it all the way back to here. We'll go ahead and get that mounted up, but you can see the factory hanger. I'll like to try to use that. 3-inch pipe's gonna go underneath the diff here. And we've got a turbo style like Dynaflow muffler from Summit. It was a cheap muffler, but I'm gonna hang that right here, and I think I'm just gonna do a 3-inch straight out, and then I will massage the bumper to make it look cool, because I don't want to have this ridiculous bend right here. It's just no reason for that. So let's get that other piece of exhaust stuff in here and get to work. Coming together. Looks pretty dang good on the routing, if I don't say so myself. But anyhow, right now I just have this section tacked, some Mickey Mouse welding just to get it routed where I want to go. And you can see I'm gonna have it real tight to the cross member because the car is low as it is. Currently right now the lowest part is the actual clamps themselves, which I can rotate up, but because of the thickness of the resonator, that's the lowest part of the exhaust. So I'm trying to keep it that way all the way back. And you can see here, that's where the muffler is going to go. Let me grab that bad boy. So I got a Summit brand, like dyno muffler. Let me, if I can hold this thing up with one hand so you guys can see. So I'm going to have it tucked up in there, just like Mercedes did. And I'm going to have to make a pie cut section that connects these two, obviously, because you can see I got to come left as I'm looking at it here, up, and so I got to make like a mini downpipe almost to connect the muffler. And then you can see Mercedes had the muffler come out of the muffler, bend hard right, and then come out the back there. I don't know what I'm going to do yet. We'll get the muffler up in there first and see, but we're almost there. All right, the entire exhaust is completely mocked up. It's sitting crooked, but that's because I have it hanging with 18 gauge wire and no actual exhaust hangers. So it's all mocked up. That'll straighten out once I finish weld everything and then hang my exhaust hangers. Ended up using some pie cuts here. This is a Summit Dyno Flow style muffler, straight through. Did my little signature 45-degree tip I always do right there. This thing, I think I'm going to mount one of these right here to support the muffler. And then I'm gonna mount another one right here. And that's pretty much should be all the support it really needs. I might add something else here. But the exhaust is complete. I just have to finish weld everything and put the hangers on. So like I said, just to recap, resonator straight through, bunch of old leftover EcoBoost DeLorean parts, Summit Universal exhaust kit, some pie cuts I had laying around, Summit muffler, took a piece of straight pipe, cut a 45 in it. Now I just have to weld everything 3-inch stainless all the way back. I'm pretty proud of this exhaust. One of the nicer ones I've made, I think. And there's no ridiculous bends. Everything kind of flows and then it comes straight out the back. I cut the bumper and I think it's gonna sound pretty wicked. I mean, if the motor runs that I built and doesn't destroy itself in the first 10 seconds or fail to start, but really proud of that downpipe. And the reason I left the wastegate straight dump tube like that is my very first turbo anything I ever built had an open dump pipe on it, and I loved it. Quiet when you're driving normal and obnoxious when you want to go fast. So we've got the harness installed. Exhaust is completely mocked up. We've made some good progress here. All right, well that's gonna do it for this episode of Time with Steel Garage. Hey, it's been a tough year for a lot of people, a lot of loss this year, cost of living, you name it. So take this time this holiday season to enjoy those people you care about the most and do what you can. We'll see you next time.